Hello, my name's Simon Forrest, and I'm the current principal at the College of St Hild Bede. My intention in the next 10 minutes or so is to give those of you who weren't able to join us for our live session a week or so ago a summary of the information I'm able to give you at this point about the prospectus for the development and refurbishment of our college and work on the Leazes Ride site where we sit. And this is up to date for May 2023. And one of our key objectives you'll see at the end is to make sure that we keep you ever more engaged in communication about what's happening, and we hope a deeper level of involvement in making the plans for that. So this is just the bigger picture I'd like to sketch for you initially. The refurbishment of the college is now a live and active project. I know that many of you have been waiting for this for many years, but we now have a proper structural organisation and a financial plan and basis for doing that. So the primary reassurance I want to give you is that the aim of this project is to refurbish both the historic Hild and historic Bede buildings and restore them both once again to be the core of our college. And they would be the site, as we envision at the moment, for the bulk of our accommodation for students. And indeed, I think too, we're anticipating that possibly Christopher and Thorpe would either be renovated, major structurally, I think indeed, or perhaps there might be some new build on those same sites. Broadly speaking, and this is largely determined by the engineering possibilities on the site, the age and condition of buildings, and most of our buildings are not in the best condition they might be in anymore, I'm afraid to say, is that this prospectus is likely to involve the demolition of the Cadman complex and the construction of a new hub building, which is likely to be a multifunctional space for the whole performance venue, dining and so on. I'm very relieved to say that the initial design thoughts that have been shared with us so far preserve and enhance those heritage buildings. So that's Bede, Hild, and of course Bede Chapel and the War Memorial, which are the two listed buildings on the site, and Joachim. And that these would largely become the spaces where the student spaces we have with them already would be preserved and renovated within that. I think right now the prospectus is also open to the exploration of whether or not there might be more new building on the site, including the possibility that that could be a new college, or alternatively postgraduate accommodation in the form of perhaps annexes. That's not decided as yet, but I'll explain why these things I think are quite probable and certainly possibilities. And that flows from the model that the university has chosen to adopt to complete this major project. So that's going to be done what's called through a DBFO, a developer design built and operated, funded and operated model. And that means that it's a way of producing enough capital to meet what are the very high expenses of renovating the site and creating something very special here from what we have and additions to it. And in order to achieve financial viability, it is likely, as well as meeting strategic intent of the university, to ensure that more students for the university have accommodation within the collegiate structure, both incoming and returners, that will need another college to do that. The modality for getting us to the conclusion about what that looks like and then getting the work done is through currently working with two preferred partners. I'm not going to name who they are for really rather obvious, I hope, commercial reasons. We can't do that. But the idea is we're working with two partners at the moment, and we will select down to one later this calendar year on the basis of the work that they'll be able to do to provide us with at least a high level view on the project they would offer us. So that's the kind of bigger picture. Let me try and say something about how that might shape up on our location. So I should give due credit to Google Earth for letting me snap this picture, and consequently the labelling is theirs and not mine as well. But you'll see, I hope you can see that there are, alongside the green footpath routes, most importantly, I've marked a red, a blue and a kind of yellow area on this map. And within it you can see from above there for the location of our current buildings, most of which you'll know well, I'm sure. So it looks to us as the following are the kind of potentialities on this site. That the zone at the bottom right hand corner, as you look at it, the red zone, is topographically not an area that anybody would want to build into. It's just not possible. That land is very steep, as many of you will know, even though it currently contains a flat place where there's a car park. So certainly what we're looking towards in a prospectus for development is the continuing to enhance and in fact add to the greening kind of potential of that space. And I've certainly got in my mind a vision that might include more public amenity. As you know, our site often is for dog walkers at the moment, but in terms of greening and gardens and so on into that space there. If you look across to the top where the blue is, I think that's essentially where we might move the facilities that we've currently got in Cabin Hall, so up the hill. And what that does is open up the yellow space down on the bottom left. I've moved it rather over towards what was Bede Gym, but if you imagine it coming slightly back and across towards Cabin, there's the potential for new buildings if we want to put anything in. So if there's an institutional decision to have another college, that would be where it's located, or alternatively postgraduate annexes and so on. So I hope that's clear. And here's the kind of timeline as it stands for how this might work. So we're in 23, 24 and in what I would call a developer engagement process. So this is discussions with them, and they've been to visit the site, and I'm delighted to say shown a high level of engagement, particularly with student colleagues at this point, the leadership within the SRC, trying to understand what a college community is and what our community is, our history, heritage and traditions, what we're beginning to think about in forward-facing terms, and on that basis begin to design some sort of specification. Late this year, as I've said, if you look in the middle row of this graph, the what a purple coloured graphics here, that we'll probably select down to one of those. And then, not before, we think the end of the calendar year 25, so some way away, would any works begin on the site. And those would then, we think, take 2 to 3 years to complete. You'll see at the bottom of this that what we're going to do for this year is, as we've done last, offered a combination of catering and self-consultation here at what I'm just going to call Riverside. The nomenclature is not intended to apply permanently or with any rigour, but it's a way of describing our current and what will be our future collegiate home, because we also have student residences at something called Ernest Place, which is about 15 minutes up Giles Gate. So we'll be offering accommodation in both those sites, catered and self-catered respectively, by all 4 members of college. We are anticipating at this point in time, at the end of next academic year, so 24-25, that we might move out to somewhere called Rushford Court, and I'll describe that to you in a moment. It is necessary for us to vacate the site to allow these works to take place. The idea that we could, which we had explored, which was sequential or renovation, of course, just increased the time and the cost. And I think neither of those things what we want to do, and enabling people to get the best shot of doing the work on the renovation of our buildings and then any new construction feels like the best thing to do. And then we'll come back to site, and that's there behind my shoulder. At that point, the college will be self-catered with the capacity for a dining hall as well. But that's certainly the university's strategic decision on that. So let me tell you a little bit about Rushford Court. These images are it. Some of you might recognise it from the top two. On this slide, it's what was the old Harding building where the hospital is situated, more or less underneath the viaduct. So really still very city centre, and in fact even closer to the station than we are now. And you can see the way that site is being constructed, which is currently owned and operated by a private student accommodation provider, is to enhance and use the original stone building, which is not dissimilar. Yeah, I'm delighted to say in many ways to some of our historic Hild Bede sites. And you can just see in the images around it, there's some much more modernistic, but I hope at least in some extent architecturally resonant building, which is student accommodation. From the plan view, which is behind me bottom left, it's also clear, I hope, that the old building's in the centre of that site, and the accommodation reaches round it, and I've circled a little piece in red there, and that is where we're going to raise some new build, because this current site doesn't have some of the amenities we would expect and need as a college. So it doesn't have common rooms, a bar, other kind of welfare or activity areas, and so on and so forth. So that has now secured, we've now secured planning permission to have that work done, and that's anticipated to take place in this year for the capacity to us then move into it and be ready for us for a temporary home while the work's done on the site. And I can just give you a flavour of some very preliminary thinking about the plans for it. So directly above my head, on the right-hand side of the slide, is just the ground floor front of the Harding building. So that's the older building that I showed you. And these are just some tentative thoughts about how that might be largely comported as office space to become the college offices. And also some welfare and other space in there. And if you look across the other side on the left-hand slide, the building that will be raised on that green space that I showed you on the previous plan at the site, there would be what's been called a heart building. So it'll be a multi-storey building sunk largely into the ground. So not much raised above the current ground level, because again, it's another sloping site. So on one side, kind of, fronted, but the back of each of these rooms will be built into largely into the ground, and then on the top a grassed and open area, and that's going to contain the bar, comma rooms, SRC office, and a number of other those kind of important facilities there. So we're into that kind of preliminary level of planning for that now. I hope it's okay. I just want to conclude then by saying something about what some of the key issues are that we're facing right now. We are, particularly once we reach the position where we have an identified and preferred partner for this build on our existing site, really, really keen to start to build up opportunities for your engagement on the refurbished college design. And of course, we're anticipating there'll be donor opportunities there, both in terms of time, but indeed we hope perhaps in other ways, including financially, to help us secure the brightest and best outcome we can for that. We can begin to surface, I think, some of the ideas once we get some sense from the planning developers what they're thinking about. I think the other key issues are, of course, college operation and flourishing during these years of transition. This is a nearly unique experience for a college, particularly an established college within the city of Durham, one with our traditions, values, ethos, importance, power, and strength of community. And every year during this process has to be the best year possible it can be for the students that come with us. Hild Bede is not about jam tomorrow in the sense of this project. It is about any student arriving now having the best possible experience they can. And so I have committed to principles around none of our current levels of activity, particularly that driven by a student college in terms of clubs and societies, endeavour and activity, should be compromised in any way by this. We will invest more of our time and energy and the budget that we control into making sure those things thrive. So the reassurances I want to give you beyond that are this: that in terms of staffing, we secured an absolute guarantee from the university that as a consequence of these transition moves, there'll be no job losses. I think there might be some changes in role, particularly for operational staff. If we just have to face that when it comes, but that'll be a discussion that we'll be having with people, and we'll try and do the most sensitive and best way we can to get the outcomes that people want. We will, during the period of the rush for court, clearly have a diminution in our facilities on site. We will not have a theatre, for example. And I think we recognise that currently many of our clubs and societies benefit from having, a great range of amenities on site, access to the Joachim room and the chapel and so on. And we just need to be realistic about the fact that we can't occupy those spaces on the Hild Bede site as is while they're being worked on. So the plan is to build up our relationships further with the wider local community in the city of Durham, particularly around the viaduct and indeed up into Giles Gate, and find those facilities and venues where we can outside. And rent, hire, and I think we indeed find really productive synergistic relationships with them around the use by our student body, and enable that student body to draw even closer to the community of which it's part. And just to give you some tiny flavours examples, Hild Bede Theatre have done some fantastic work on, particularly post-COVID, reviving and regenerating their relationships with local youth groups around theatre. So if we can find a venue for the theatre in which they can increase that interaction, we hope to capitalise on that opportunity to really embed that work. And similarly for student volunteering and any and all other clubs and societies that we have. I mean, that segues nicely into the fact that we have to, I think, seize this as a moment in which to build up and continue to champion the extraordinary legacy this college has had in terms of its relationships with the local community through the SCA, as it was, and right through now into the community's work that our student colleagues do. And critical to that, outside the confines of the city, it seems to me, is the engagement of you and others who are members of our alumni community. And that engagement is something we're working really hard on through the provision and development of new projects So ways that we link current alumni with students, and we'd be happy and delighted if you'd like to talk to us about what those opportunities might look like. But of course, I think on top of that, securing ways of our current student community recognising that this is a supportive voice and a voice of experience and acumen that we can bring to the discussions about how we develop college in the future. And of course, I think the other area that we're really keen to have your engagement, expertise and advice is around support to students during this period. Just one example is that we currently benefit in a very great way from trusts and funds that are granted to us and scholarships that people have been creating to enable us to support our students. We know this attracts students to the college, which will be an important feature for the next few years, but also it retains their engagement with us over time, as well as its primary purpose, which is to create development opportunity and potentials for their futures, which are much more advantageous as a consequence of it. And I think you should be ready, I hope, and willing to hear from us when we start to share some sense of what we've already managed to achieve, the gratitude we have to our alumni community for the support with that, and therefore begin to shape and show what those opportunities are that we hope that you might want to come and enjoy with us. I hope this has been a useful briefing. This is a difficult time for us, and we shouldn't fail to recognise it. And I continue to articulate that inside the university around the challenges that pose for us. I have one key aim in my stewardship and service to you and to our community in this, which is to see us not only thrive and flourish through it, but be bigger, better, brighter and bolder when we come from the other side. In other words, to have a site that once again suits and reflects the mightiness of Hild Bede within the university and its status across the community here in the world more widely. And beyond that, to be even greater and more powerful in its service to its future and the communities that it has yet to serve. Thanks ever so much.